Hi, it's Leanne, and I am this wonderful show of Chewing It Over, usual takeover that happens every second Tuesday of the month. So I'm always talking about something that is of interest to you in some way, no different to that. Some of us are still in recovery. I reckon therapy live, and then even from the weekend's England game, I know I'm in some recovery from that. But as always, this will be a nice integrated session, and I do encourage you all to drop your comments when we can see them. We can obviously talk about them, and if we know who it is, because we actually will also bring that in. Funding, what's available, and in particular, ring-fenced funding. And I'm really looking forward to having visibility and engagement. It is so important within our session, and I'm bringing on these two guests to talk about this specific item, because I think the phrase is, when we know better, we do better. And I think that when we know what's available to us, what resources and things like that are available to us, and we know we can utilize them outside of, let's say, for funding through our workplaces, or maybe those of us that work privately, we know then that we can utilize those services that we're already working on, right? To improve those, to enhance them. And I think that particularly in this day and age where people are looking to have investors, there's a whole realm of this that is probably a new world to some, but is also a very accessible world to others, particularly those that are in the circle of getting help and getting investment in some way, shape or form. So without further ado, I'm going to bring my two lovely guests to the stage. I always think that half an hour is not anyway, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But I have Ishmael Beckford, who is one of our recently elected council members. And I also have Adine Adonis with me, who is she's a clinical specialist in neurology, but is also a lecturer. Let me bring them both in so they can introduce themselves. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I hope that we can make this as fruitful and as productive for people as possible. Adine, can you just introduce yourself first so that everybody knows who you are, what you're about, so they get a real feel, because I want to keep them here for 30 minutes, right? Tell them a little bit about you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Leanne, for the invite. So as Leanne said, my name is Adine Adonis. I am a neurophysiotherapist, and I do a whole host of other things, which includes research as well as lecturing at a postgraduate level. And my passion lies in neurology and ensuring equitable access to learning for physiotherapy staff members and physiotherapy students, but also making sure that health inequalities in people of colour are reduced.
That's great, thank you, Adine. And Ishmael, can you tell us a little bit about you, other than the 350 words on the council address?
Not much to add other than what was in the council address, to be honest. But thanks for the invite. I think I'm sort of MSK physio by background. Have worked in the private sector for a number of years. I've kind of moved away from my clinical role and now more in management and leadership roles. Alongside that, I also do some work within the CSP already as a co-optee to council, and like yourself, moving into a fully elected role later in the year. Congratulations, Leanne. And alongside that, I also sit on the Charitable Trust Education Awards panel.
Lovely. So this is a really nice combination, I think, of people to come talk to us. You guys working as a team, especially, to come bring these items. Adine, can you talk to us a little bit about the ring-fenced funding? And I know you already stressed about ring-fencing equality, right, in terms of ensuring that for your physio staff, but also the students as well. Talk to us specifically about this stuff that relates to us in terms of physiotherapy. Tell us a little bit more.
So we know that in the current climate, accessing funding for courses, for example, or conferences is really, really difficult. And we also know it becomes more difficult the longer you perhaps in a work situation. And as Ishmael said, he and I sit on the education and awards panel for the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. And that awards panel provides funding for courses and conferences for people who apply. And it was Ishmael's brilliant idea to facilitate the ring-fenced funding that we now have in place as a pilot for the next year or so for our BAME physiotherapists. And Ishmael can tell you loads more about how it's come about. I suppose from my point of view, it's to stress that the funding is there, it's available, and people need to apply. And the application process is not difficult. But it does require some thought, and it does require a couple of goes at it. And we can perhaps talk about that in a little bit. But ring-fenced funding for things that you want to do that you perhaps couldn't get done at work previously would be really, really useful to help keep you continuing on your path of continued professional education.
I think this is brilliant. And you know, Ish, you know, I'm going to come back to you about this, but one of the things, particularly in my CSP address, is about working with, you know, youngsters to inspire, you know, the next generation of upcoming, you know, physiotherapists. And there has to be some synergy, doesn't there, in terms of the things that are occurring, you know, and that doesn't matter whether I'm doing it, Ish is doing it, or whoever else, you know, whether it's our eyes that are helping us to drive these things. But there needs to be some synergy. And I think the more you're talking about something that's available to people, the more they can say, oh, you know, from one friend to another. You said it might take a couple of goes. The process itself is new. So yes, it probably is going to take a couple, but people shouldn't get disheartened by that, right? And if you've got some signposts, even for people to be able to contact you guys directly, you know, even if it means that when I share this afterwards, I make sure I put your email addresses in, so people know that they can contact you directly if they have got some questions. I know for a fact when I was training, when I was a therapy assistant, I didn't initially know that there was funding for me to be able to go on to qualify as a physiotherapist. And it was actually through talking to one of the parents of the gymnast I taught, who told me about the initiative. She didn't know about it in its entirety, but that's why I'm here now in front of you guys, you know, through funding. So I think it's really important for people to know what's available to them. Ish, talk a little bit more about where this came from, because, you know, for something like this to come, it's quite grassrooted, you know, in terms of, you know, taking something like this from a thought and actually being able to put this to someone who then says, yes, let's do this. We think this is a good idea. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so you know, there are a few things that kind of led to this getting off the ground, really. I think one of the first things was looking at the data that was out there and identifying the existing inequalities, which, you know, people may or may not be aware of, but some quite stark kind of numbers, particularly around you know, likelihood of kind of accessing non-mandatory training from ethnic minority groups in comparison to their white counterparts, particularly kind of within the NHS space. So the RES data kind of highlights to us that there is there's a lower likelihood that from certain communities that you're going to be able to access this training. Alongside of that, there are the other issues that the RES highlights around likelihood of being exposed to discrimination, whether that be from including from, you know, colleagues and line managers, and all things that in my mind potentially could lead to people struggling to access training and development opportunities. And I'm, you know, very passionate about people being able to access training and development and having the opportunity to progress their careers. I think some of that data was then appreciate again call out the RES data. It's not physio specific, but we can reasonably expect that some of that will apply. And then you know, the CSP's EDI survey also kind of highlighted that physios from Black, Asian, ethnic minority groups have got don't have less likely to believe that they had equal access. They greater levels of concern around recruitment, career progression opportunities, greater level of concern around opportunities to kind of network and develop contacts. So we're kind of building up this picture here that there's an inequality of experience, and there's a number of things that we should be doing once we identify these things. So also I'm quite, people know me as well, but don't necessarily think we need lots more data about these things. There's lots of data already out there. We need to kind of do stuff with the data that we've got. Yes, let's continue to build that picture and reassess, but let's get to the doing bit. So following that, a bit of work was done to probably just get a bit more of a snapshot view from the BAME network in terms of their experiences. And I think Adine sort of very importantly made sure in the beginning that was identifying, first of all, are there any barriers, and not sort of making the assumptions, which was a critical thing. But also we did find that there were things that people found barriers. And I suppose a slightly broader question, maybe to the one you were asking and framing around access to funding. It was more access to CPD funding could be one of those problems, but actually there was another number of other things, whether that be just the the logistics of getting time off work, or understanding of kind of what was available to you, line manager support, completing applications. Lots of other things could contribute to it, and yes, funding addresses some of those, but actually there's other things that that feed into it. It's a fairly complex picture.
And I think that as you're, we have I always have a conversation before I bring them onto the show, because I want to make sure that when I bring people on, that the information is relatable, to everyone that potentially is listening. But also, a lot of the topics that I bring people relate directly to me, because I think that my own experiences, yes, I'm one person, but my experience can be reflective of a lot of other people too. So I have my own thoughts and my own opinions about things that I talk about on the show. There's one thing in particular, as you both speak, say, and I'm not sure how people listening will feel about it, or whether they will even be aware of it, but there's a real culture, and I am Afro-Caribbean, I'm West Indian culture about work hard all the time, and in working hard, that almost seems to come across as though within that is you shouldn't ask for help, like you don't need help, right? And actually, I think that the culture is moving. I think it's evolving for people to realize that they need to be able to work smarter and not harder, and that it's okay to ask for help, like whether that's in the terms of seeing that as funding or guidance from a mentor, or reaching out to someone. We know through the pandemic, people have become so much more accessible. But I do think that there's been a culture. I can't speak about the Asian and other minorities, but to me as a Black person, this thing about this work ethos, that we're hard workers and always really, really pushing, has meant then that you're not even looking to see whether I can get help from somewhere else or someone else. Would you agree or disagree, or what are your thoughts around that?
I agree with you. I think that for such a long time, we as a people have needed to be quite independent. And we don't have the social capital necessarily, or the professional capital that other people may have. And I think that's one of the first things that we need to recognize. And not having that means that we have to tap into networks, form networks, go and find people. All of this is really, really hard work. We also need to understand, though, that what perhaps got us here is not going to get us there. And until we understand that little bit, because, it's like doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different response, and you're not going to get that different response. And as Ish said, the complexity of filling in forms or completing applications for funding, especially when it's funding external to work, is complicated. There's a certain way to write it. There's a certain way to answer the questions asked, or how do you get across what you need to in the 500 words that you've been allocated. And I think that's why Ishmael's pushing forward this initiative has been so important, because it's allowed that education panel to sit and think about, okay, how else do we need to help? What else do we need to do as the allies, perhaps, to remove some of these barriers? And that could be things around, this is how you fill in an application form that looks like this. This is what these subsections mean, what they actually want from you.
Yeah, and I think just to add into that, the key thing is about barriers here. So Leanne, I recognise that sort of cultural observation of you have to work hard, you have to get your head down. That whole idea of twice as hard, working twice as hard for half as much. It is a sort of cultural thing. But I think we need to recognise, be really clear on why that's the case, and the reason for that is because of the inequality, because of the barriers, and I think sometimes as well, probably outside of the community, that not having an understanding of that, and people buying into this sort of I suppose illusion of work environments being meritocracies when they're not really, because there's not equal starting points, and people are facing different things. Some people have got their laces tied in the race, some people have got hurdles in front of them, and others don't. And it's initiatives like this that level the playing field to some degree, where we know there is inequality, we can act against it in a more equitable way. So I think it is important that the cultural bit of working hard is great, and reflected in other communities as well. But what we're talking about here is people having to face barriers that others don't face.
Yeah, and I think when you both responded to that, this thing about understanding why we're at this point, and then culturally then understanding why we've done what we've done for so long. There will be people that haven't really identified that, maybe even for a black person listening to this might be like, oh, actually, yeah, I do work that hard, and I haven't realized why I've had X, Y, and Z struggle, and being able to talk about that openly, but also in the same breath being able to answer the people who will say, well, why are we ring fencing funding? Why is that okay to do for the BAME community? Like, why is this okay? And it's even to say to them, or to the others, that this is why. That the playing field is not level, has not been level, and this is an initiative to change that. I think that this is just, it's sensitive work, and this is why I wanted you guys to be on here to talk about it, because it's sensitive. It's sensitive for the people who think that they want to apply for the funding. It's sensitive for the person who's at a workplace who has struggled to get funding for other initiatives. Almost like you've given them another alternative, or how could they get another alternative? But I think that when people realize that these types of resources are out there, and this isn't just for the student who knows that they're out there, but for the workplaces to know that this is available, I think these conversations start to become slightly easier to have in and amongst a group of people, wherever that group of people sits. Does this make sense?
Yeah, definitely does. And I suppose I think it's an interesting one, because I have seen comments and people kind of raise that question around, well, why are we focusing on this and that? And I suppose sometimes have a slight underlying frustration to questions like that sometimes, because also it's, well, why wouldn't we focus on it? We've identified a challenge, an issue, something that we can put something in place to hopefully address it, as a minimum test to see if this can address it. I'm not too sure of the validity of the counterpoint being there's another bit of inequality over there, or there's something else here. I think, ideally, big picture, you try and address things with sort of an intersectional kind of lens on it, but also if you've highlighted a specific issue, let's try and address that.
Yeah, let's try and work on it. Yeah,
specific issue. Yeah, it's I think it's all. I don't think it's particularly productive conversation to be drawn to be drawn into. But yeah, it is something that comes up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always. I mean, yeah, like you say, not productive to be drawn into, but you know that it's there, so it kind of ends up being like a bit of the pink elephant in the room. So I think at least, if people are feeling awkward or they're not sure why this has to exist, even in terms of, not trying to assume that you know everybody's thoughts, but then trying to, you're putting out, you said, there's this problem and this is our solution, even if it's as simple as that. Adine, because you obviously lecture, and do you think that, when you sort of got involved in this, is this something that you felt actually, my students have struggled with this? You're seeing this from a different, because I'm treating patients, on a day-to-day basis. Ish is more managerial. You're there with the students. Even if they're not saying things, certain things that are coming up as commonalities, that you will be seeing overall experience in this field.
So one of the things I started doing with students is being very upfront with the conversation of, how is this being funded? How is your course being funded? And I think I was quite surprised that quite a few people were trying to self-fund. I mean, I self-funded many, many years ago, and I didn't know about these opportunities. And when you tell people about the potential funding route for their course, they're quite surprised. But then things become stuck in terms of completion of the paperwork, trying to understand what it is that the paperwork is asking of you, and putting together that really nice story that helps sell you as a prime candidate for funding to be awarded. And I think we don't necessarily know how to do that, and I'm happy to stand corrected if people think that's not the case. But I applied twice to the fund before I sat on the panel, and the first time I was rejected out flat, and I couldn't understand why I was rejected, and the feedback didn't help me shape my application better. And the second time I applied, I got it, but the amount of effort and energy that I had to spend in coming up and completing 500 words in sort of 4 subsections kind of thing was hard work. And knowing who to turn to, who can then give you that opportunity and that lens to kind of go, well, actually, you haven't answered the question, or you have, etc. I think that from a HEI perspective, we need to ask the question instead of making the assumptions, because I think we will be very surprised at what some of those answers are.
That's interesting. So Ish, if people want to get information about this, where can they go? Like, where is this? Where are we directing them?
Yeah, so the best sort of information would be the Charitable Trust award pages on the CSP website. So kind of all of the details are on there. So if you just search on the CSP website, or I can share the link. I don't know if you can share that as well. That's probably the best route. But then again, also kind of happy for people to kind of reach out if they want to have a talk through anything. We are also going to be pulling together some additional resources to share with people, just to support them kind of going through the process, and kind of essentially give them a bit more guidance and tips on what they need to do to make sure that that their applications are in the best shape possible.
I think this, if you haven't put yourself forward for things before, or you're someone who's struggled a bit with your learning, because I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic, and that wasn't picked up until I was doing my master's, and I self-funded my master's, right? And I remember doing my first essay, and I will mention her name's Pat Canning. She was a senior physiotherapist who'd known me as a physiotherapy assistant. And I remember giving her my first essay to read, and she was like, it's like information dumping. you know, and even the strategic way that you would write your essay, for example, in your master's, you know, critically appraising, understanding the terminology. All of this is really important in terms of then how you're going to move forward with forms in general, you know, whether it is you're applying for funding for, whether it's your PhD, whether it's, you know, any kind of research work moving forwards in the future. And I think, you know, agree or disagree, but once you start to get into the flow of doing these types of forms and this type of paperwork, you realize it also is a skill you are developing, right? And I think the sooner people kind of get to grips with that, whether I got funding for my placement in the Bahamas, that was a Joe Jeans Memorial Fund at the time. I don't know whether that still exists. I had to go and present to CSP afterwards. But there are so many other things that are available to students, and people need to start getting clearer on what it is that they think they're working towards, and is there help. And I'm sure the CSP won't mind me saying that they can probably contact them directly if they want to talk about that. But also, you guys are on social media platforms. Adine, I know you're on LinkedIn. Ish, you're the same. You're on Twitter. You're very active on there. So if we're encouraging our student community or our employed staff, they should come and, you know, drop you a message in the DM and say, listen, I'm a bit stuck with this. I get some guidance and mentorship, or can you assist? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important bits to understand is that you need to fully justify why you want to undertake that placement, or why you want to undertake that module or that MSc. And once you have that justification down pat, and you can ask yourself the question, can I get anything? So for argument's sake, if it's a placement, can I get anything comparable in the United Kingdom? And that's a yes, no question, or maybe question. And depending on what the answer is, you then need to feed that into your application. And so that's just a tip for people to think about and remember as they go about filling these forms. It's always trying to understand what the funder wants from you.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I think, you know, coming back to the sort of charitable trust awards, some of this is about just making sure you do the basics right, because actually a lot of the applications we see that aren't successful, it's just not doing the basics right. So, you know, work towards the criteria that's provided for you. Make sure you give the evidence that's needed, and I'd say that even, you know, conversations that people have with their employers around getting funding, make sure you've got a good case, and the case isn't necessarily just that it helps you get to where you want to be. The case often needs to be both that it ticks a box for you as well as for your employer, and you know, writing, whether it's a small business case or something like that, or kind of being really clear on what the benefits to them are going to be.
And importantly, it's about making sure that your patients get what you need them to get. So patients, and how your application will help patient care and the patient pathway is going to be critical.
That's great. I just want to thank you, because I mean, my face has been a little bit frowned as I've been listening, and I've not really been smiling all that much, but it's like I said, it's a very sensitive, very serious topic. I really wanted to bring this to light, because I know that there are a lot of people that follow what we do, you know, what the Physio Matters does. And I think that if people start having more conversations about this, and just, you know, hugely into people learning, that's why things like Therapy Live are hosted in the first place. And it just felt like a really good platform to then talk about this. Like you said, it's not just the physiotherapy course, like what else is it going to help you with? What's that funding going to help you with? So it's not just then, you know, driven towards the therapy aspect. And I think that this is hugely important, because it gets us all, I think, thinking outside of the box, you know, in terms of what it is we want from ourselves, from a personal and professional development point of view. So I just want to say thank you so much. I will make sure that I've got the right contact details for you when I share this. People can reach out to you should they want to. And I thank you so much for coming in and talking about this, because, you know, like I said, I knew the 30 minutes would never be enough. But if we have to do a part 2, so we can at least find out, you know, where things are at. But you know, my assumption is that these types of things will continue the more people are using them. And if we're not using them and we haven't got people applying, then it doesn't last more than the year that you stated, right? Thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry, Ish. You gonna say something?
That's all right. No. I was going to say. So the charitable trust award. It's a limited award. So there's a certain amount of funding which is ring fenced. Initially, obviously, it's being run as a pilot, and we need to see the impact of that, and I suppose explore what opportunities that may open up further down the line.
So get applying, people. Get in there.
Exactly.
Get your applications in. Apply. Lovely. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you both again soon.
Thank you for having us on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. We are out of time. I've overrun by at least a couple of minutes. Our learning and our development is so important for our future, for moving forwards and ensuring that the playing field is level. Those of you that are out there and our allies, allies to minority groups, I can't stress enough how important it is that if you've listened to this and you know someone who's applying to do something, help them. I think what's the saying, if you can't be anything in this world, be kind. And most of us spend so much time at work. If you can provide people with a little bit of support, a little bit of encouragement, and help them to move forward, you have no idea what you mean to that person. I'm Leanne. It is always a pleasure being here on the show, and you will see me again on the second Tuesday of next month. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Take care and have a lovely, lovely rest of week. Apparently the weather's going to get brighter from here on in. Shouldn't be me here.